welcome Cassandra Robinson. Cassie is a physical scientist in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, Standards Coordination Office. She is responsible for leading the development of documentary standards and coordinating with NIST technical units, other federal agencies, industry, and relevant stakeholders in the development of standards and conformity assessment systems. Cassie is joining us today to provide a presentation on simplifying standards development, a case study of less lethal impact munition standards. Welcome, Cassie, and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me to do this webinar, and I'm also very appreciative that you offer these webinars on a regular basis. I really enjoy them. So, hello everyone, I'm Cassie Robinson, and I have been working in standards development for a little over a dozen years. It doesn't seem like that long because, you know, time flies when you're having fun. But most of that time has been spent in developing standards for law enforcement, corrections, and public safety. So that's what I'm using as my story for today. And if you read the abstract, you know, we're talking about standards are a critical part of making sure that equipment used by law enforcement and corrections officers works like they think it will, and that it keeps them safe. And so after working in this area for all these years, more than a decade, we've learned a lot of lessons that help us deal with the challenges that are routinely experienced during the standards development process. For instance, like, how do you get the right people involved? Once you get them involved, how do you keep them engaged? How do you get stakeholder buy-in? And how do you drive progress? So I'm hoping to share with you some ideas for addressing those challenges and simplifying the process of standards development. And I'm going to use less lethal impact munition standards as an example. Because those have been in the news a lot. They're kind of an interesting topic and people know a little bit about them. So that's what we'll be talking about. And then there are going to be 2 giveaways during this presentation. So I encourage you to have your email open so that you can respond. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see my simple email is just cwr@nist.gov. Okay. All right, as I mentioned, standards development comes with many challenges and it can be very trying at times. So I'd like to start off by giving you something to think about. And it comes from this book, The Coffee Bean by John Gordon. And I want to read you an excerpt from it. It'll give you the gist of the book. It's a really short but very good book. So he says, life is often like a pot of very hot water. Standards development also can be like this, but it can be a harsh, stressful, and difficult place. You will find yourself in environments and facing conditions that test who you truly are and can change, weaken, or harden you if you let them. But you have a choice. You can be like the carrot that is weakened and softened by its environment. You can be like the egg that is hardened by its environment. Or you can be like the coffee bean that transforms its environment. I love this parable. So this is going to be our first giveaway. So the first person who sends me an email that says the coffee bean, that's all you have to do. Send me an email and we'll give this book to the first person who sends me an email, and I'll work out the shipping details with you later. Okay? All right, I have a couple of basics of standards development that I'm throwing in here just to, because we hear about the basics of standards development, but I want to actually put them into the process of doing standards so that maybe they make more sense. So the first basic is the typical standards development process, and many of you are probably familiar with this. You've seen at least some version of it where you start a standards project, you mobilize a group of people to work on it, you draft the standard, you ballot the standard, you might go back and forth here between drafting and balloting several times, then it goes to final approval, and then you begin the revision cycle. But we're going to focus on identifying the need for a standard and the first 3 parts of the process that we can influence. And I'm focusing on those again because those are the parts we can influence. The other 3 things, these 3 over here in blue, they're really just taken care of by the procedures and processes of the standards developing organization. All right, the second basic that I'm going to weave into this story is 5 key principles of standards development. And I'm sure y'all have seen these before too. So the first is openness. That means all interested parties may participate. Nobody's excluded. There's no unreasonable financial barriers to participation. Voting membership's not conditional or restricted to a particular type of participant. So that's openness. Balance is actually balance of influence and interest, meaning nobody can dominate. Consensus, according to OMB A119, consensus is defined as general agreement, not necessarily unanimity. And y'all, if you've worked in standards, you know consensus is one of those things you can't really define well, but you know it when you see it. Fourth is appeals. That means there's a process for impartial handling of procedural appeals regarding any action or inaction. And then finally, due process. That's all about fairness and equity, making sure everybody has an equal voice and they can express in a position that must be considered. Okay, so these are generally accepted principles, and not all standards development activities follow these principles, but most do. So it's important to know about them. And for us, we're going to focus on openness, balance, and consensus, again, because those are the three things that we can influence in the process. Appeals and due process are handled by the Standards Development Organization. Although you'll be involved in it, the three you can influence are openness, balance, and consensus. Okay, and let me pause here because I see somebody email me the coffee bean, and that's Jackie. So Jackie, I will work out with you after this how to get that book. Thank you for participating. Okay, a couple of years ago, we were asked at NIST by the Army to help them develop a repeatable framework that anybody could follow when developing standards. And so this is a complete framework for a very complex process. And it was born out of a project on Army combat boot. So this boot is a complex product. So there's the upper materials, the nylon and the leather, there's the sole, the outsole, the midsole, the insole. Then there's the protective capabilities like puncture resistance and ankle support. And there's a different group of people that cares about each of these things. And on top of that, there's a group of manufacturers. So again, very complex. So I call this complex framework the full cap extra large framework. For when you need it, it's there. And let me pause just a second and make sure nobody's waiting in the waiting room. Okay, all right, I think we're good. All right, so most projects are not so complex. So I have a scaled down version that's a little more handy to use. I'm calling the half cap medium framework for when the full cap extra large is just too much. And I use this framework for every standards development effort that I lead. And probably right now, I don't know, I got more than 10 going on, but probably less than 15. So it's a very handy framework. So you can see there are 4 pillars to the framework. And then down at the bottom, there's the supporting foundation of soft skills, which is so important in standards development. And when you're following this process, the standards development organization can be engaged at any time. So it could be at the beginning, could be at the end, or anywhere in the middle. That's really not the most important part of the process. All right, so if we're gonna look at the framework, the half-CAF framework, as applied to less lethal impact munition standards. And these devices are things that are used by law enforcement officers for crowd control. And again, you've probably seen it on the news. There's been a lot of just news about this, good, bad, ugly, all kinds of news about it. So let me tell you a couple of things about these in case you aren't that familiar with them. So in this picture in the center of the screen, that's just a launcher. It looks kind of like a gun, but it's not a gun. It's a launcher, and it fires 40mm munitions like these shown on the left side of the screen. So you can see there's this cartridge that's holding, in one case, these 3 little rubber discs. In another case, there's a cartridge that holds a big spongy foam nose projectile. And then another kind of launcher is in here in the middle. It kind of looks like a shotgun. It's not, but it does fire 12 gauge munitions. So you see several cartridges. One on the right has some little rubber pellets. I don't know what this torpedo shaped thing is called, but it looks like a torpedo to me. And then they can also fire bean bags. So these are used, and they have been used for decades, but there have not been any standards. So that's a really important point that I want to drive home, that I think there should be standards for just about everything, but certainly something like this. You should have a way to assess their performance. All right, and this project began with law enforcement officers coming to us and expressing their need for standards, and they had three primary concerns. So number one is unverified or no claims about the impact energy at the target, whether the target, being the targeted individual, is close to them or far away. So if the energy is too low, there won't be any effect. The person will continue bad behavior. But if the energy is too high, there could be a serious injury or even death. So it's very important for the safety of the targeted individual that these things do what they're supposed to. Number two, accuracy and precision. So does the projectile hit the intended point on the target? And I'll point out my little chart down here on the right side of the screen. So these are target zones. Green is the primary target zone where you want to hit. Yellow is okay, not as good as green, but red is off limits. So it's important that these things be accurate and precise so they don't hit anybody in those red zones. And then third, there are no standardized test methods, so there's no way to verify the performance of these rounds, and there's no way to compare one with another. All right, and now we're going to apply the half-cap framework to this project. So the first pillar of the framework that we're going to introduce is shown over here on the left. It's identify core team members. And the core team is very important and often overlooked. I mean, a lot of times in the past, I've just jumped into a standards development effort and I didn't have this core team, and it's really important. And before I go any further, I just want to point out this red circle over here that says initiate project. So this is where we are in that 5-part standards development process. This is step 1. And the things I'm talking about on this page have to do with initiate the project. All right, so the entire core team is important for the success of a standards development effort. But the most important person is the driver. And some people might call this person the champion of the project, but I use driver because I like the analogy of a bus and a bus driver. Who doesn't like to take a tour on a bus and have somebody guide you along the way? So I like the tour bus and bus driver analogy. So the driver is the person who, number one, commits to the project and they care enough to make it happen. Take responsibility for the bus and all the riders, making sure everybody travels together, arrives at the same time, safe and sound, with no injuries. And some of y'all know standards development can be painful. Second, this person carries and communicates the vision. So the driver carries a metaphorical telescope for making sure that they keep focused on the long-range destination. So this is long-range perception. And they also have to carry a microscope for zooming in and keeping focus on the fine details. So you have to have both. Vision requires both. And then this person also holds the sword. That's the pen. You know, the pen is mightier than the sword. So this person holds the pen and does the writing and editing of the standard. And then fourth, along with all that, they share the work with the team and collaborate. So the driver is really key to the whole process. And then next, other members of the core team are the tour guides. So they are individuals who share the vision and they want to get on the bus with you. They want to take the journey. They have specific knowledge and relevant experience in key areas. And then they are willing to accept the assignment and follow through. They're willing to do their part to keep the effort going together and focused. So moving along, everyone together at the same pace, going together so we arrive together. For us, Less Lethal Impact Munitions, we have 2 tour guides. One is a very experienced police officer that knows everything there is to know about using these devices. And the other one is a respected manufacturer. So you need both. All right, the second pillar of the framework is to understand the problem and develop a plan so you can actually tackle this issue. And there are really 2 activities here. Number 1 is research. You need to research all the relevant past work that has been done, take advantage of that. You need to look at literature, standards, articles, whatever else you can find for the purpose of understanding the product or process you're working on, the user needs, the industry, the market, the environment, the feel out there in the world, which is really important right now for less lethal munitions. So look into everything you can find. And I encourage you to take advantage of your organization's libraries or other libraries. Take advantage of free search engines like Google Scholar. And then there are also government resources like your friends at NIST. We love to help people out with standards development, and we like to do research, so we would be happy to help as well. For less lethal impact munitions, we had, thankfully, research and testing data funded by the National Institute of Justice. We had work done by NATO in this area, and we have test data provided by manufacturers. So we had a good bit to build on. Then once you have all that information collected, you're ready to develop an approach with the core team. So it's likely that you will find a lot of information. Hopefully you will find a lot of information. So you'll need to collect it and organize it into a form that you can use and work with. We typically collect everything into a spreadsheet, and sometimes it's a multi-worksheet spreadsheet. Sometimes it's simple. We include diagrams, charts, whatever we think can help people see and understand the process and help us to develop a plan of attack. All right, we're moving to the third pillar now, and I just like to point out that over here, this circle changed on the right. So now it's moved to mobilize working group, because that's what we're starting to focus. So the second step in the process of standards development. And then we also have under there 2 keys that we talked about earlier that we're gonna cover in this information covered in pillar 3 helps with openness and balance. All right, so the third pillar is to engage others beyond the core team, as I said, and you'll want to identify key stakeholders that should be involved and invite their participation. So it depends on the project. This could be federal agencies, end users, testing and certification bodies, industry, researchers, academia, consultants, others could be general public. It again depends on what you're working on. But many of the right people can be identified by doing the research that we just talked about a minute ago. All right, once you have all those people identified, you'll want to share the vision with them using your telescope, not the microscope, giving them the big picture, presenting the goals, approach, and benefits, and how this work could ultimately be beneficial to them and their organizations. And then, of course, you want to ask them to get on the bus and take the journey with you. And I always like to encourage people's participation by saying, hey, if you don't help us out, this could all go south and work out badly for you if you don't have your perspective put into the mix. So that's really important. Our key stakeholders for less lethal impact munitions, our full team includes almost 10, I think it's 9 or 10 end users, both federal end users and state and local. We have staff from the United Kingdom Home Office that's done this work for years. We have federal standards representatives, university researchers, 7 manufacturers, and 2 testing labs. So it's a pretty comprehensive team. All right, and the next thing is we use the Facebook approach of, if you like this, share, like, and invite others, and that helps you reach less obvious stakeholders. I mean, some stakeholders will be obvious, but then there are others who can be really helpful that you also need in the team. Then connect regularly or communicate regularly with your group. So I think it's really important to set a timeline for regular meetings. 4 to 6 weeks works well for us. It depends on your group and how quickly you want to accomplish things, but generally 4 to 6 weeks. I don't like to go more than 6 weeks without meeting with the group. I certainly don't go that long without talking to them by email or phone, at least. And most of our meetings are virtual. Well, all of our meetings for less lethal devices are virtual because the people are from all over the country and across the pond. It's important to communicate between meetings to let people know how progress is being made, what's coming. You just want them to know what to expect. And this is a way that you keep them engaged by letting them know we're still working on what we talked about at the last meeting, and get their buy-in along the way. So every meeting, we take a look at what we said we were going to do last time and give an update. So typically it goes like, this is what I heard you say. This is what I did with what you said. Did I get it right? And people will always tell you if you don't get it right. You can count on them to do that. And then care and feeding of working group members is really important. So I like to sum it up with this little icon that I'm showing over here that says plan, do, follow through. So all three of those are very important. And my personal philosophy is that I never schedule a meeting without an agenda. I don't hold a meeting that I have not fully prepared for. I always send out meeting minutes right away and always do more work than you ask others to do. At the same time, it's important to share the load, to empower people to act and help you in making decisions, and then to publicly acknowledge their good work. That's really important. And lastly, keep the energy high and positive. And continuing that idea of keeping the energy high and positive, I want to share with you the 10 rules for the ride of your life. These rules are great for life, but they also apply perfectly to standards development. They come from the Energy Bus, which is another parable by John Gordon. And you can see in the bottom of the slide, I'm going to give this one away too. So the first person to email Energy Bus to me at cwr@nist.gov is going to get this book. And again, I'll work out the shipping details with you later. But these rules are so good that I just wanted to take a minute and let's read them together so they sink in. So number 1, you're the driver of your bus. Number 2, desire, vision, and focus move your bus in the right direction. Number 3, fuel your ride with positive energy. 4, invite people on your bus and share your vision for the road ahead. 5, don't waste your energy on those who don't get on your bus. 6, post a sign that says no energy vampires allowed on your bus. I think that should be posted in all of our offices too. 7, enthusiasm attracts more passengers and energizes them during the ride. 8, love your passengers. Even though people in standards development, y'all know, can just try your patience to the nth degree. Love your passengers. That's like a personal lesson for me. Number 9, drive with purpose. And 10, have fun and enjoy the ride. Those are so good. All right, and I could see somebody just emailed me, Meredith, I got your email, so I will work out with you getting this book to you. Thank you for participating. Okay. All right, and the last pillar, the fourth pillar of this framework is to document and write. So all that work you've done up to now, need to process that research and the work of the task group into a form that provides a map for standards development. Once you have the map, review it with all the team members to ensure you got it correct, it's fully complete, and to get their buy-in. And you can see over here on the right, the red circle called draft standard is right there. So this is the third step in the process that we can influence. And then we've also moved into consensus. And when you get to this point, you'll have everything you need already done, the necessary information, all the right people and their buy-in, and a plan for what needs to be done. It's literally a map. So I wanted to show you a quick look at our map for less lethal impact munitions. So this image, it's complex and you don't need to understand it all, but it shows 3 test setups for performing measurements and calculations. So over here on the left is the firing system, and over on the right side are the targets, and then the red boxes are all the things we're going to measure or calculate for each one of these setups. And again, the details are not important for this discussion, but suffice it to say that these 3 test setups address the 3 primary concerns of officers. So we are addressing, number 1, the impact energy when the target is both close and far away. So that takes care of safety of the person targeted and the stopping power. 2, accuracy and precision at each distance. So will the projectile hit the target in the allowed impact zone? And 3, we'll have a standardized test method for comparing the performance of different impact munitions. So once we developed this map, we reviewed it with a small group of end users, tweaked it a little bit, then we moved to manufacturers, tweaked it a little bit, moved to testing experts, tweaked it again, and finally, we presented the whole version to the full team and they approved it. So now it's just a matter of writing the standard. We actually have already written the words that go with this map. But this map changed everything. Before we got to this point where we have a map, our discussions were all over the place and we just were not making progress. So this map changed everything for us. And lastly, this is just a quick review of the top 5 supporting skills for success that we talked about throughout this presentation. So number 1, be a coffee bean and transform your environment. Number 2, carry and communicate the vision using your telescope and the microscope. Number 3, communicate regularly with your people. 4, plan, do, and follow through. And 5, be the driver and drive the energy bus. That's what we want to do. All right, so that concludes the presentation. I really thank you for your time and attention. I'm happy I got to share with y'all today. I hope that you have some questions, and I hope this presentation helps you. And thanks again to Women in Standards and Karen for setting this up and for establishing this group to support and encourage each other.